Hi there. So this is me talking about we had the two selections to read. I chose to do two separate videos so the length wouldn't be too long. So this is me talking about the article About Rhetoric by Jim Nugent. I'm going to be looking back and forth at my notes. I took notes on what some of those key concepts that I thought were. So the main thing that I learned out of everything is about rhetoric and how we're going to be using it specifically for persuasion. So it can be used in other ways, but we're specifically using it for persuasion. And there's a lot of forms of rhetoric around us. We just have to look a little deeper, whether it's a rhetorical question or whether it's someone like a lawyer, a politician, a sales associate, a scientist. All different kinds of people use rhetoric. And we're going to refer to it as persuasion as it occurs through any medium. So I hope that I'll develop effective rhetorical strategies through my own communication and writing skills by doing this. So a couple of the key concepts that I thought, so obviously a lot about rhetoric, how we're going to be using it for persuasion is a big key concept. But kind of inside of that, I found some other key concepts like the rhetorical triangle. So we've got the speaker, which is the rhetor, I believe I'm saying that correctly, the audience, which is who's being addressed, and the purpose. So what's the purpose of the rhetoric? And in that triangle, those all have to go hand in hand. They all have to be independently important. And, just because it's, appropriate for the speaker doesn't necessarily mean it's appropriate for the audience or for the purpose. So you have to make sure those all kind of coincide. You have to have good text within your rhetoric. So you got to use logos, ethos, and pathos. So that's what I like to say is logic, authority, and emotion. You got to have logic. You got to put some facts in there. You can't just say, this is my opinion, shove it down their throat, make them feel like they have to believe it. Back it up with facts. Show that you know what you're talking about. Persuade them. Use authority. Don't shy behind. State your opinion. Have your facts to back it up. And then use your pathos with emotion to back it up. You care about it. Show that. So in my opinion, those were the key concepts, that we're going to be using rhetoric for persuasion. And then about rhetoric, we need to make sure we're following the triangle, using good logos, ethos, and pathos, and all of those different things inside. So this is part 2 of my video. And in the second time, I'm going to be talking about the selection rhetorical situations and their constituents by Keith Grant Davey. I'm going to be looking on and off at my notes that I took again to go over the key concepts of what I saw in this article. I'm very glad that I read the article about rhetoric first because I feel like I was able to take some of the information about rhetoric and how we're going to be using it and see in this article how it was comparable, which was really interesting. So first of all, it starts out by talking about how there's still stories from a while ago that are still popular based on their rhetoric and are still, a mystery, the rhetoric, what was really behind it, and there's many different theories. So you read a little bit about that, and there are parts of, movies, shows, whatever it is, that can be analyzed for their rhetoric. So the actions being shown can be analyzed by using rhetoric. So it talks about how teaching students to analyze rhetoric is a very important part of learning, and that the purpose of this specific piece, rhetorical situations and their constituents, is to offer a deeper knowledge of analyzing rhetoric. So it talks about kind of two main things. So it talks about analyzing the individual bits and pieces and comparing it to the entirety of the story, whatever it is. So something that stuck out to me is what Bitzer said about discourse in looking into the secondary motive of what the rhetoric might be. So just because this is what you're seeing does not necessarily what it means. There could be a deeper meaning behind it, which is something really interesting to me because I always, it's interesting to look into the deeper meaning of something. And so sometimes it's difficult to know when there's rhetoric because that actor or that speaker, that politician, whatever it is, might be so professional and so well put together that you can't even tell that there's rhetoric or a second meaning behind it, which is also fascinating to me and looking into that. And so there are constituents in rhetorical situations. So, you have to fit your audience, like that triangle. Just because it's appropriate for the person talking about it doesn't mean it's appropriate for the audience, doesn't mean it's appropriate for the purpose. So the rhetor has to be able to play that variety of roles during the act, and you have to be able to kind of match what the audience needs while matching it to the purpose, while relaying that information. So there are a lot of constraints, whether that's a positive or a negative constraint. And I just thought it was interesting to read about all the different definitions and different things behind rhetoric. There's a lot of, you might see this, but that's not really what the meaning is. And I'm really excited to learn how to be a good rhetor and to learn more about rhetoric and how it's used and how we're going to use it. So to wrap the video up, there was, for the article by Keith Grant Davey, there was 4 to 5 things that you could find that he kind of defined. So I decided at the bottom of the document this video is attached on, I typed those out. So one, I feel like he talks about a deeper meaning a lot. And I think that that's a super key term, because for me, when I thought of persuasion, I didn't even think that there could be other ways to persuade behind saying, do this. I didn't think that there were those other things behind it. And it's fascinating. Then he talks about disclosure. Kind of the same thing, in my opinion. I didn't understand that one as well, and that would be something I'd be interested in learning a little more about. And similarly to Jim Nugent, he brings up the rhetor and the skill and the way that you have to be persuasive in that way as well, whether you're writing, speaking, however that is, that's a very important job. Talks about positive constraints. So there are positive things for number 4. Number 5, there are also negative constraints that get in the way. So moving on, I found about 7 or 8 things that Nugent defines. One was rhetoric. I felt like this article was a little more basic and wasn't as detailed as Keith Grant Davies. So this article talks a lot about rhetoric, what it was, some basic definitions, some basic information for number 1. Number 2, it talked about persuasion and how rhetoric can be used for persuasion. Number 3, it talked about some more uses of rhetoric, different careers that use it, in different ways to use rhetoric. Number 4, it kind of discussed our personal use of rhetoric. So we're going to be using it for a lot of persuasion and writing. Number 5, it talked about the rhetor. Number 6, it talked about the audience. And number 7, it talked about the purpose. Those 3 all have to go together in the rhetoric triangle and coincide with one another. And lastly, logos, ethos, and pathos. So using logic, using emotion, and then, being proud of what you have to say. And so those were kind of what I discovered. And like I said, those will be listed at the bottom of the document before I put the video.